Hello and welcome to another video. We're going to be going over my third week at Codesmith in this video, and so let's get started. So this third week focused more on the end of the front end and the start of doing back end. So initially on Monday we had a front end assessment, which was, I'm not going to say exactly what was in it, but it was on React and DOM manipulation and things like that, and fetch requests. It's pretty straightforward, not too bad. And so we got into Redux on Monday, and Redux is essentially like a state optimization for React, which makes it easier to handle states because you don't have to prop drill down if you have multiple components. Don't really have to worry about knowing exactly what that all means. But essentially, so we got into Redux, and we were given a pretty big project. And the reason it was pretty big is because it just had a lot of files. So if we actually take a look at this, so I'm going to pull it up here. So let me pull up the Redux. Where's it at? Here it is. Okay, so our first few projects were not too many files, but this one actually had a ton of files, and a lot of them needed things to be done. And so it was definitely confusing to figure out, like, this was kind of our first taste of a real program that like you might be working on. Still not big enough to be that, but much bigger than just like a 1 or 2 file kind of thing. So it had reducers, it had containers, it had a bunch of components and actions, and a lot of these files were missing things, and we needed to actually figure out like what the hell's going on and how to put it together, which was definitely not easy. It took some time, but essentially I can pull up what it looks like, and this is what we did for the first few days. So I can actually go into that really quick. Redux. Hopefully this works. Well, let's take a look. Okay. So this should be able to load now, if things worked well. Okay, so essentially what it is you make market cards for markets. So if you put in a market, like let's just call it like whatever, Sprouts or something, you add a market and then it gives it an ID and it tells you how many cards you have, and so you can subtract or add cards, and it will update here, and it will also add to the market. And so you can make more of these, right? So you can make like Walgreens, add a market, make Target, and so on. So you can keep adding all of these markets. Okay, let's just have a couple just to kind of give you an idea. Okay, so you keep adding all these markets, and all these markets have cards. And so you can add or remove cards. And then when you add and remove cards, the percent of the total should give you the percent of total cards. So if we just give some random number of cards, we can add a bunch of cards, and then all the totals will update, and it'll tell you how many cards you have, how many markets you have. And you can see all these IDs update, right? So it's like 10,001, 2002, 2003, 2004, and so on. So you can add, you can subtract cards, and this will update in real time in your React app. So this was made in React with using Redux for state management, essentially. You can keep adding as many markets as you look. And it doesn't look super complicated, but there were a ton of files to do this, and there were a lot of components. Like this whole container was a component. This little thing was a component. This was a component. Each market was a component. So there were like 4 or 5 components that you had to embed in each other. So yeah, but yeah, essentially you can keep adding markets, and you can keep giving them cards, and yeah, they all update correctly. And we actually didn't feel like we were super confident in finishing this. So we actually worked on this project, in this React Redux project, for over the time limit that we had. So I think we were out at 8. We decided to work on it till like 9:30 the first day because we were not super confident that we'd finish. It was definitely kind of interesting. And so, yeah, I just got a partner that was like trying to finish as well. So we were both kind of on the same page there. So we actually did end up finishing on Tuesday pretty early on. So we had Tuesday to work on it as well. But we finished it at around noon on Tuesday, but then we actually ended up accidentally deleting our code. So we were panicking about that, but luckily we found it, and it all worked out. But yeah, so we had hack hours every single day, and these hack hours, I think we were doing, I'd probably say some medium leak codes, some easy leak codes. Like we had merge intervals, we had like best time to buy and sell stocks. So some like easy, some mediums. We're definitely getting harder stuff than we were doing originally, and this is only week 3, and for most people that haven't done algorithms before, I definitely think it was challenging. People were, it wasn't super easy. Okay, so we were done with Redux on Tuesday, and honestly, what I will say is like one of the things so far that I've done that I really dislike is we have these team code reviews, and in this case, we actually had a team code review on the second day, but sometimes you'll have 2 days to do a project, and then you're going to do a code review, so essentially you're in a group of 4 people, or 6 people, and you are reviewing each other's code and helping each other out. But a lot of times, like, you'll be doing this on the first day, like 2 hours in. So imagine if you have a team of people and you're just given, like, at a job, and you're just given something to work on, and then, like, a day in, you're like, all right, let's go over your stuff. I don't think that makes too much sense. I think they should definitely hold off on these code reviews until, you know, like, the last day or the last few hours, where it's like, all right, you both did something, now let's see if we can help you get unstuck or whatever. But yeah, I definitely disliked doing code reviews that in a big group right away, because I just feel like we didn't get anything done. There's not really anything to review. And then we had the approach lecture in Redux, and I do think these approach lectures, like, the more we have, they're really nice, because what happens is, like, the instructors will tell you, like, this is what you should have done, this is kind of like the flow you should have followed. And then you can, if you got stuck, you can watch the approach lecture. You can be like, okay, this is what I did wrong. And then if you want to take more time afterwards, you can be like, okay, let me just redo the things I did in a bad way in the way that they suggested, just to make sure I kind of understood it. And also, we have these tech talks at 5:15 every day, and I think we have some more after lunch, which is essentially the seniors are presenting on a topic that they research, so it's like good for their resume and things like that. Like, I think some people were presenting on AWS, Docker, and whatever. And so I think once we're in the senior portion of our actual bootcamp in the last 6 weeks, we're going to be making these tech talks ourselves. So we went over the Redux, and we actually decided that we were just going to get out early on Tuesday because we finished so fast. So we actually just, after dinner, we just gave each other feedback, I think, during dinner. And then we just decided, yeah, we're good there. So at 6:30, we actually got out then. And then on Wednesday, we went into HTML and intermediate CSS. So this is essentially, we were taught how to style well. And basically, we were given a page, and we were taught, like, here's good styling tips you have. Here's how to use CSS well. Here's, like, all these things you can use. Here's how to style things. Like, one important thing is, let's say you try to style, but what if you're trying to style for an iPad or a PC or an iPhone, or, you know, all these, like, different screens? Is your page still looking good on those? And so, like, best practices, like, make sure, you know, your stuff changes with the size of the page, and make sure it's not defined. Try to make it kind of clean. And so I can actually show you that a little bit. So let me show you that. So I think this was the, find it really quick here. Not this, not this. I'm missing it. Let's see. If anything, yeah, so here it is. So it's the UX module. So essentially we were given, you know, some page, and then we had to make it look kind of nice. So let me show you what that's going to look like as well. So let me CD into this really quick. UX. Hopefully this works. Yeah, the problem I have is when I turn servers on and off a lot of times what happens is they end up like not actually turning off, and so I had some issues there. But yeah, essentially, so you have these cards, you can style them. We have these, like, stars. You have to make it look nice, and you have to make it change with the size of the page. I'm not going to show that here, but essentially, if I make my page smaller, like, this stuff will, you know, like, change size appropriately. So that's what we were spending on. Just, like, if you wanted some practice with CSS, it was definitely, I think they called it, like, a spa day. I do think there was quite a lot. There were still a lot of things we needed to do, and so I don't think it was that easy, because we had one day to do this, one day to do all of this, to make all these cards, to make it all fit, to make it, like, styled well, to make it all fit if, like, the page gets smaller, to make it all go down and things like that. So I definitely think it wasn't super easy, but, you know, it was kind of relaxing. And because we learned HTML and CSS, like, on our own, just doing the pre-course, you know, getting a day to get some best practices on it was definitely useful, you know, what to do and things like that. Okay, so that was the Wednesday. And then we had a collaboration coding once again. So, like, we had 2 or 3 hours to work on it, and then we worked on it in a group again, and I wasn't really a huge fan again. Like, I just feel like working in a group of 2, you can get things done, but once you're working, like, 4 to 6 with one person coding, and also a lot of times, like, you'll live share, a lot of people will join your group, and then they'll just start, that's the other really terrible thing, is, like, imagine you're coding, people join your group, and then they just start coding in your code. Like, we had a lot of these collaboration sessions where, you know, they were just like, oh, all your stuff's all wrong. They started coding in there, and then you're trying to debug, like, what the hell just happened? So I definitely think these are a lot better maybe to do at the very end. Then we had an approach lecture on it. Once again, I think these approach lectures are super valuable, and that's where I kind of learn most of the information, if I didn't do super well, if I didn't finish, I could be like, okay, let me watch this approach lecture, figure out what's the flow of information, and then let me go back and fix my stuff to make it like this. So we had our refactoring, we had our feedback, and then on Thursday, we started learning Node. And so essentially on Thursday, we started learning Node, and Codesmith is really big into teaching you like the most, the ancient way people did things kind of things, so we learned vanilla Node, and they basically said like, we want you to learn vanilla Node, and then we're going to teach you the Express framework that's going to simplify a lot of these things, but we want you to see how it works under the hood. And it's also really similar to a lot of things I did with my CS degree, where like they teach you a hard language, they really teach you how things work under the hood. Like I learned things like assembly, and I was coding in a language like C++, where there's no automated garbage collection. You learn how memory allocation, deletion, all that stuff works. So I do think that's quite valuable, but once again, we had this collaboration coding, which I'm not a huge fan of. And then we had the approach lecture. So let me pull up this node just to show you what that looks like. So let me find it. Quite a lot of stuff here. Redux, Unit 8, Skill Builder. Let's see, Node. Okay, so essentially we had a server, and what we ended up doing was so I think this should work too. Let me just pull this up really quick. Yeah, so let me see, Unit 8 Node. So hopefully this works. Hopefully these servers aren't overriding each other. Yeah, so I think the problem is here that I actually use NodeMon instead of Node, so I'm not entirely sure it will work, but let me try it. Okay, I think it might be working, but let's take a look. Praying to God it works. It might be localhost 3000 as well. Okay, nice. So essentially what this works is, the way it first worked is we didn't even have this front page. All we had was a server. And so what we actually had to do is we had to use this thing called Postman. So I'm going to pull that up really quick. So if you open Postman, essentially what Postman does, it's quite useful, is you can go to let me find it here, my workspace. And essentially what it does is you can send requests to a URL. So you can have this like localhost URL. So you can see like if I send a GET request to this localhost 3000, it should give me, so it gives me the HTML for the page. So essentially, if you don't have a front end, you can use Postman to talk to your back end, and you can test all your API endpoints. So because you don't have a front end, like you don't have anything to do, we didn't really have these buttons originally. You have to have some way to communicate with the server, and Postman's really nice, because you can send any kind of request you want. So let's say we can patch, we can whatever. And you can also put data in your request. So you can put like JSON data in your request. You can give it a bunch of stuff. And so that's what we were doing, where we were sending these requests, and then we were testing them. Because originally, like I said, we had no front end. This was given to us later. But yeah, essentially, so all these things, you don't really see what happens, but essentially they all update a file. And so I can actually pull up this thing over here. So you see if I click some buttons, so I click some buttons, you see it says like, hello, what's up, hello. Essentially, you're writing into a text file. And so whenever all these things happen, you're writing into a text file that you can't see right now, but you are editing it. Actually, probably, no, I can't do that. Yeah, never mind, I can't do that. But what I could do, let me see here, is like if you make, so you could test like GET requests to non-existent addresses. So if you typed in something like this, we're going to get an error not found. You could also test some other stuff. So let me see here. Like you can make a post request where you write, say hi, let's say. So if you make a post request here, it should give us some stuff back. Yeah, so it's like you can test if all your server endpoints are communicating. But the problem with this vanilla node is I can actually pull it up. So in our server was actually just a bunch of if-else's essentially. So we made a server, and you see how like we have if it's a GET request, do something else. If it's a GET request and something else, do something. If it's a post, do something else. And essentially in a real program, you're going to have like, a lot of endpoints, and all of your endpoints are going to have a lot of requests. So you don't want to just have 100 if-else's. And that's why they were teaching us Node to say, okay, you're going to do it this way. You're going to learn it this way. And then finally, in the future, we're going to teach you Express. And so that's essentially what we were doing. Yeah, for this Thursday, it's pretty straightforward. You just make a server, you give it all these requests, and then you either use promises or asynchronicity to fulfill the requests. And you're definitely once you do Codesmith, if you want to get a little head start, I'd say learn a little bit. Like learn a little bit about promises maybe, because you're going to be using them in the future. If you're learning of like async, that's going to be pretty good for you in the future. I definitely recommend that, because that's also a topic people have issues with. Okay, so that's what we did. We had our approach lecture, we had our feedback as always. Then on Friday, we started learning Express, and so essentially we learned about asynchronicity in Node, and we started learning Express, and we had a skill builder. So I think I can pull that one up as well here. Let me just double check. I think it was like the Unit 8 skill builder or something. Here it is. And let me just see how this runs. I'm not entirely remember. I think what we actually have to do is we have to actually like run npm on it, but let me just double check here. So SEPLS Unit 8 skill builder text. Let me just copy it actually. Okay, so we're going to go into it and we're going to see some tests and things like that. So what this can do is, let me see. So we can run npm. So we can run npm test here, where it tests our stuff. So it did pass, but the user can enter JS equals, yeah. So it actually did pass when I was testing it originally, but maybe I changed something originally, or I changed something later. I think you can run something like npm start. Hopefully, start missing, maybe not. Yeah, I don't really recall how to write into this, and it was working before. Maybe it's npm run. I don't really recall off the top of my head, but essentially what this did was, yeah. Okay. So anyway, I'm not gonna open it right now, but essentially what it was is you were reading like input from a person, and so I can actually pull up the code here, kind of to show you really quick. You're reading input from a person, and you are waiting for it, and then you are returning stuff to them. So this is actually the test. I think what happened was maybe I didn't. Yeah, I think I actually just didn't. The problem I have is I don't think I uploaded it back to my head GitHub, or maybe it gotten deleted. But essentially, you learn how to take input from a user, and then you wait for that input, and then you once you get that input back, then you ask them for more input. So you learn how like connections work, and you learn how to do promise chaining. So essentially, it was like one big promise chain. But yeah, it did work for me originally. Maybe I did something wrong now, but I'm not going to get into that. And then so we were actually learning Express. And we had our mentor-mentee session. So there's a senior that's my mentor, and I talk to him once a week. And then if I have questions, I ask him. And then I also had a session with one of the lead fellows where he was kind of asking me, like, how's it going? Who did you have fun working with? Things like that. Like, how are things going for you? So that was pretty good. And yeah, so we were doing Express, and we had a lot of issues when we were doing our Express project, essentially, because we had a lot of server issues. Like, our server would just be on and we forgot to close it. It was a lot of like technical stuff. And yeah, this Express, let me pull that up. So this Express project was also a lot of files, and there was a ton of stuff. Let me see here, Unit 9 Express. Yeah, so there was a ton of files in here. So there was a server, there was a client. So if you go to the server, there's all these like controllers. So essentially what we did was we took our node from the original assignment where we just had a server, and we broke it down into routers and data and controllers. And then we also had a front end that was giving to us that we could also use. So if I actually go to, let me see if this works. I think this one should work because I was just working on this today. And this is the one I was spending today refactoring. So let me just pull this up. So this could do a lot of funny stuff. But let me just, hopefully it works. I think it's npm run dev. Okay, so this one should load. Let's just make sure here. Localhost. Yeah. 1 second. Pull it up here. I need the URL. Okay, here it is. So localhost 8080. And that should work. Okay. So essentially what this was once again, you're testing your API endpoints. And in the beginning, you didn't actually have a front end. So in the beginning, we just had a server that we had to use Postman to communicate to. So the same kind of thing. We can give it posts, we can give it gets, we can do whatever we want. But essentially, this was just like a more complicated. This used Express, and this front end was given to us, and we have to communicate with it. So we can do something like get more characters, and all this data is stored in a folder in the server essentially. So we can get more characters, and then we can also do things like refresh. We can add characters, and so I actually did some funny stuff here. So let's say you add a character. I actually took a bunch of like pictures of people in my cohort and just made some funny pictures, and so it would take a random picture and create a character. So if you actually look here, it would just make like random characters of people in my cohort, and you can add more people. And so if you wanted to add another character, you can add another character with whatever features you want. And so this is essentially doing a post request you can create, and then it would be like another person and so on. So let's delete these. And I did have an issue where like I had to reload the page to actually have my stuff work. But when I tested in the server, it was working. And then you can also favor your characters. Same kind of thing, you have to reload the page to make it work. But yeah, so you see you have like favorite characters. You can get more info, you can customize characters. Like we have to do all these things. You can make a nickname, whatever you wanted. You can save it, and you can go back and it'll be saved. Reload the page. But yeah, so essentially this Express thing was a ton of files. And I was spending today refactoring, and I actually got through all the bonus stuff where yeah, we could get more characters, add custom characters, delete custom characters, do whatever you want. But this definitely taught us how to use API endpoints correctly, because there was a ton of code in here. I can actually show you. So here's like this is like the Express code of the stuff I was working today. So, or actually, I don't think this was not the Express code. This was something else. So let me pull this up. We need to pull up Unit 9 Express here. Here we go. Okay. So here it is, and we were mostly working on the server side. So what ends up happening is we had a utils that we didn't really use. So we had a router, and essentially what it was is your server. So here's a server. It would take a bunch of APIs and it would divide it into groups. So anytime we had something routes.api, that would go to one router, routes characters would go to another router, and then routes faves would go to another router, and then we had a default like didn't find anything. And so actually it was these are the APIs. So API favorites, API characters, API. And then we had these routers here. And so all of these routers, so this would be like the endpoint of API, we'd be able to get, and we'd be able to get more characters. We'd be able to get an ID, post something, patch, delete. So essentially you're working on all these things, right? So get, post, patch, delete. I think the only one we didn't work on was put. I believe we didn't have a put, but put and patch are kind of similar. So yeah, so you practice all these API endpoints, and you also practice chaining, calling all of your middleware methods. So like in something like this, you would call a middleware method, call another middleware method, practice sending OK responses or error handling, and practice sending data in requests. And so I think this was definitely quite helpful. I wish we had more time to work on it, and that's why I decided to work on Sunday, because we were at a point where I was unhappy. I think the rest of the assignments, I was at a point where I was pretty happy with what we did, and I didn't want to work on it further. But this one, I felt like we didn't do enough just because we ran into so many actual server issues that were less code related. But yeah, so you had routers, and then you also had controllers, which was essentially the functions that you called. And so these are all the functions that you call. I think like half of them were written for us, and the other half we had to write. But we knew what to use. And you really got to practice your error handling, your passing data from one to the other, and things like that. And then you can see that our data was stored in these files. So essentially what the front end did was it got all this data, and then anytime you add characters or you change characters, it would change this data. So this was like simulating a database, essentially. But yeah, so that's what we did for that. And then we had our approach lecture, once again, super helpful. And we did our refactoring, we did our feedback. And so just to give you a little preview of what we're doing next week, we're going to be doing things like DBs, and we're going to have a assessment of Node. And so that's what I was studying, studying Node and Express. But yeah, that's going to be it for this week. Hopefully you liked what we went over. Like I said, I'd say for this week, everything was new to me once again, super helpful, learning the backend, learning how API endpoints work, learning how, to use Postman was super helpful to communicate with the server. And I will say that I did take a Udemy course on Django before, where it was kind of similar, but that was more of a follow along, where this was more of like a do it yourself. And so I feel like I learned way more from doing this than from just following along with the Django course, because the Django course was a little bit more complicated than what we did here. But because I was pretty much copy pasting code all the time, I feel like I only got 10% of it or something. But I still do remember, the status signals, the different types of requests, things like that. So that was definitely helpful for doing this. But yeah, so that's actually going to be it for this video. Hopefully you liked it. And if you have any questions or any comments or anything, you can write those. And I will see you in the next week review next week. So thanks for watching and have a nice day.